Hello everyone, and welcome to my live stream. Today we are going to take a break from the katydid model that I've been working on for the past few live streams. Just because I was doing a lot of poly painting and I didn't want to do another week of poly painting. I want to take a break from that and explore something else. So this is another project that I'm working on that is more realistic or based in real life. This is a Bumble Bee, Bombus sonorus. So this is one of these super fuzzy bees. That's a dead picture of the bee right now. Let's see if we can find a nice picture of what a live one looks like. Hold on a second here, pull up the old images, and so this is what we're talking about right here, one of these guys or gals. And I'm actually working on this model for a friend. This is a friend is Stephen Buchanan, and he is an entomologist and an expert in bees. And sorry, I called him Stephen Buchanan. His name is Stephen Buckman, and he has a book out called What a Bee Knows, Exploring the Thoughts, Memories, and Personalities of Bees. So my favorite insect is bees. It used to be ants, but bees have taken over in my heart. So I'm having a lot of fun working on with this, and I thought I'd just share some of my process of working with scan data because it's a big part of what I do. Working with scan data is interesting because obviously if I'm working on insect models, I'll get a scan. Here's an example of the scan data that I get, and this is the one I got from Steven. This is nice quality actually. You can see a lot of detail. Obviously it's not very symmetrical. It's kind of in a crazy pose, and it's missing a lot of the fur, and the fur that it does have is kind of this kind of geometry right here, which not the easiest to work with. And basically my steps when working with scan data is to make it into a model that I can do something with, or ideally that the client could do something with. So in some cases I'm working with 3D printed stuff. So for example, I'll pull up my website real quick and show some examples. What I'm talking about. Make sure that that's recording correctly. Thank you. Too many windows. So, for example, I've done a lot of stuff for museums where I've been giving scan data and to turn it into something that they could 3D print. And so a good example of that would be something like this. This is a pseudoscorpion. This is what the final print looks like. And these are all models that I created from scan data that are on display in the Western Museum in Australia. And so this is what my model looks like, and it's kind of posed and everything. And I don't know if I have a picture of the scan data here. But regardless, a lot of times the scan data I get is kind of mangled and all this kind of stuff. So the first thing I want to do is clean it up, make it symmetrical, make it into something that I can pose, and that's something that they can 3D print, or in some cases something that it could be rigged and animated as well. The other thing that's interesting about working with scan data that's important is I do this kind of stuff for Hollywood projects as well, not just science projects, but a lot of times if I'm working on a project, it could be like, film title sequence or even parts of a film, and I'm giving, or a TV show, and I'm giving, like Aquaman's a good example. I worked on the title sequence of that. I got a lot of scan data of the props, or sometimes it's really, or another example would be, I worked on the opening title sequence for The Stand, the TV show, the most recent version that came out a few years ago, and I just had a whole lot of scan data that I had to go through and clean it up, make it look nice, do UVs, textures, and all this kind of stuff. So it's a useful job skill, not just for science, but also if you work in CG or visual effects. a lot of times your starting place will be scan data. So it's a good skill to learn. And it's, a little bit on the tedious side, but the payoff is pretty big. Then the other nice thing about working with scan data is that you get something that's very accurate. For years, I've been doing insect models based on illustrations and photographs, and that's really hard because they're two-dimensional, and it's hard to get a nice photograph of, say, this part of a bee, or say the underside here. And even though this has a lot of noise in it and the geometry is not all that great, it's still a lot easier to see what's going on, because as you can see, there's a lot of these pictures, you get a lot of fuzz and dirt and schmutz and that kind of stuff that you've got to sort out. And you also have to learn how to imagine what a bee looks like naked, and that's not easy either, not to mention weird. So in any case, this is the original scan data, and then here is my model so far. So you can see where it's at. I'm still keeping it in the same general pose, but you can see how I've made it mostly symmetrical with the exception of the mouth parts. The legs are symmetrical, the abdomen is symmetrical, and I've also gone through here, like if you take a look at the abdomen, you can see I've got it in polygroups, and I've actually also done some Zremeshing on here, and each different part of the abdomen is its own piece of geometry and its own polygroup. And that's basically starting with something that looks like this. So you look at this geometry. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to work on the legs. I think the mid legs, the rear legs are already in pretty good shape. Let's turn on the solo button and take a look at them. You can see that they look, okay, that's the scan data. Let's get the actual finished version of the legs here. Right here. So here's where I have the legs. And as you can see, I mean, they're nothing to write home about at the moment, but they're just in a state now where I'm ready to start to work with them, add some detail, maybe clean some of this up, and maybe fatten it up a little bit, make it look a little bit more lifelike, because this is, after all, the scan of the bee is from a dead bee. So I'm going to do some sculpting on that, and then if we take a look at where I'm at with the mid legs, these still look like, I've basically cleaned them up a little bit and made them symmetrical, but you can see it's still this kind of data. So I'm going to start with these guys tonight and just go through my process for cleaning them up. And so what I'm going to do, the first thing I like to do, let's turn offline for a second here, is make a duplicate so that I have this as a backup. Something that I could project from, or something that I could use as a reference in case things get a little bit out of control, which sometimes they do when you get really into sculpting, into the weeds there. So I'm going to duplicate this guy, and then let's move him all the way out of these folders. Let's rename this guy, so we'll just call this rear legs. You can see I take advantage of folders and that kind of stuff quite a bit. I just call this rear legs. And I'll call this mid legs. And the other cool thing about working on this tonight is you guys get to see how truly cool insect legs really are when you look at them up closely. The other neat thing about working with scan data is that a lot of these scans now, they've gotten super good, and you can actually see what's going on the inside of the exoskeleton. So for example, if I'm just going to hide part of the legs here, and you can see on the inside, it actually shows, these are the actual muscles on the inside of the leg. These parts right here. It's more impressive when you look at the thorax. So this is my re-topo version of the thorax. So let's see if I can find the... Let's just take a look at this guy right here. I'll just go up here and just do a cross section of the bee. So you can see the muscles in the inside of the thorax here in 3 dimensions. This is the amazing thing about working with scan data, if it's a really good scan. and it's pretty cool. Not everything shows up, but a lot of the major parts. So eventually I'd like to do the inside of the bee as well as the outside. Anyways, that's for another time. Let's just worry about legs right now. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let's start chopping this up. Well, let's start getting rid of the stuff that we don't need or don't want. So that would be things like the hairs and maybe some of this messed up geometry right here and some of these stray parts. So I'm going to turn on double-sided under display property, or it's already on. And I'm just going to start deleting stuff I don't need. So I'm going to hold the Control and Shift and then Alt and then hide that. And I'm just going to, let's go into Select Lasso. And so this is a bit like giving it a haircut. We don't need a line on here. I'm going to turn on Symmetry. Okay, so we have Symmetry. And then just zoom in here. Take the old stylus and start by just hiding this stuff. And if you have any questions, let me know in the chat. The thing is that I'm going to eventually, my plan with this one is I am going to be releasing a long form tutorial, probably on Udemy or something like that, that goes through my entire process from the very beginning. So I've recorded a lot of the video of the other parts already. I just got to go in and start narrating them. But eventually I'm hoping this summer to have the full video available on Udemy. And I'll announce where you can find it once I get that done here on my live stream. And my plan is also to add fur. So I'm going to add back these hairs back in. And I'm going to do it probably in Blender. Even though Maya, I'm a bit more comfortable with Maya than Blender. I wanted to do it in Blender because a lot of people doing this kind of stuff, you know, scientists and that kind of thing, don't always have the budget for Maya and are more familiar with Blender, so I think it's a good opportunity to do it in Blender. So I'll get to test out how the Blender hair system works. Usually when I do insects or spiders, I've done it with Maya and Yeti. And Yeti, the fur plugin is very nice. I like it. But it's always good to learn a different process. And all the kids love the Blender. So, but I'm not going to talk about Blender. We're going to talk about ZBrush. So I'm just going to get rid of as much as I can. And then what I'll do is I'll do a Dynamesh. I'll polygroup the stuff. And then do a Dynamesh and then a Zremesh just to get it into a piece of kind of geometry that I can work with in terms of sculpting. And so my goal right now is to make it easy for ZBrush to do a Dynamesh and also to do a Zremesh as easy as possible, considering how messy this geometry is. And the trick, of course, is that, as I just showed you, is there's a lot of stuff on the inside as well. And so I don't necessarily, for this particular model, I don't want to worry about what's on the inside of the legs. So the real challenge is going to be remeshing it in a way that the legs don't get in the interior stuff doesn't get in the way. Here, we do that real quick. And that could be tricky. And it's similar to like if you're working with doing something for 3D print. So I did a bunch of jewelry projects with Tomas Wittelsbach a few years ago, and that really taught me how to go in and clean up on the stuff on the inside because you got to make it watertight for printing. And it could be very finicky about that, so I developed some techniques or some approaches to help deal with that kind of stuff. So like I said, this is a bit more technical than I've done in the last few live streams, but I think it's good to mix it up a little bit. So I left this long spike. That one's important. See then a lot of wasps and bees and hornets, a lot of insects, ants as well. It can do serve a lot of purposes. One could be just as simple, allowing it to climb and attach onto walls and that kind of stuff, for plants. The front legs have a notch that the bee uses to clean its antenna. It's a very cool. I mean, I love bees because they're so incredibly functional in the way they look. Every part of them seems to be optimized for a particular task that bees have to do, pollination and that kind of thing. This is also nice because insect feet can be kind of tricky. Not because they're terribly hard, it's just hard to get a really good picture of them and a good sense of what they look like in 3D. So having this scan here is really helpful, being able to see these kinds of shapes. And they're just really beautiful shapes. I mean, that right there you could use as inspiration for a head of an alien or something like that. So I'm just chopping off the hairs here at the end of the tarsi. And it takes a while to learn what's something you can get rid of and what's something you need to keep. And this is proof that bees do actually have really cool knees. So the expression is valid. The bee's knees, pretty neat. Let's see, I've got some holes and that kind of stuff I've got to deal with. Hey, I'm glad you guys enjoy my insect modeling. It's been about 10 years now. I still haven't got tired of them. They're very cool. This is a bit tricky, which is why I saved it for last, because you can see it's kind of partially open here. This is the coxa. So the coxa right here, the trochanter, femur, tibia, metatarsus, the tarsi, and the foot. And this one's tricky because it's part that wasn't easy to separate from the rest of the model. So I'm going to have to wing it. Sorry, that's a bit of a pun. For the moment, and let me show you how I'm going to deal with that actually. The first thing I'm going to do, so I've hidden all those extraneous hairs to get them out of the way. Rather than delete them altogether, instead of deleting them, which you go down here and say, to geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. But I'm never quite sure if I've actually hidden the right stuff or not. I'm always a little bit nervous about deleting it all together because it's always entirely possible that I've hidden something that I actually want to keep. So rather than doing that, I always have backups, as you can tell, like copies of subtools and that kind of stuff. So rather than deleting the hidden, I'll go down here to split, and I'll do split hidden. And now I have just the hairs by themselves, so the mid legs. I can always delete that subtool later if I decide I don't need it, but at least I have it just in case there's something I need to keep. Excuse me. Tea, good. Okay. Hopefully my cough isn't as bad as it was last week. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm going to do a Dynamesh. If I do a Dynamesh right now, chances are it's going to freak out and crash because I'm going to have all this kind of stuff. It's going to be ugly. So first, let's save this. So I'm going to save this in the next version. So this is going to be version number 9. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert some spheres here just to kind of create some geometry that will be easier to Dynamesh. You can see how these are pictures that Stephen provided me, by the way, so you can get an idea what these legs look like. I know it's kind of grisly. They're all severed and stuff, but if you can get past that, look at how beautiful these parts of the legs are. They're just fantastic. I mean, it's just really beautiful. So I'm going to use insert mesh, insert primitives, and I have symmetry on. So let's just drag it here. I don't want that. I want a ball. And I'll use this. And so I'm just going to squish this ball around until it kind of covers that open area. But not so much that I lose the sense of the shape here. This particular model, the client wants a version that can be rigged and animated. So that's sort of my final goal here. Like I say, and I'll probably do that. I'm going to do that, or I plan to do that in Blender. Which is going to be an interesting challenge because I'm much more used to Maya. But it's always good to, expand your knowledge of other software tools because that's constantly changing. There we go. So this. And cover some of these straight polygons here. This is the part that attaches to the body. I'm used to looking at these things, so, but if you are not used to it, this is what attaches to the thorax, and this, of course, is the leg right here. And let's see, it's okay. Close up some of this stuff. The thing that I had the worst time with in terms of scan data is actually not an insect. The one that nearly drove me insane was a scan of a typewriter. Because I just, I had to do it under a very short amount of time, and I kept trying to Zremeshing it, and it just would turn into a mess, and I had to keep splitting it into different parts, and then eventually I had to do manual retopology of parts of it just to get it to work because the scan was so nasty. That nearly killed me. But I learned a lot. And I've been doing some of this work on iPad as well, Zremesher iPad. If you haven't had a chance to check out the latest version of ZBrush, they now have a lot of cool new features. The iPad ZBrush is really nice because they're starting to make major changes to the interface, which I know people have been talking about for years. And most likely those changes will also appear in the desktop version. And they have nice things like ZModeler now has presets and things like that. Okay, so there's my kind of rough block in for the coxa. I'm going to control drag to clear the mask. Let's save this and see what happens when we do a Dynamesh. Okay, so I'm going to actually, let's do this. Dynamesh. I'm not sure what the scale of the object is, so I'm just going to Dynamesh at like 344. So that's really low res. It's about 14,000 points, so that's too low. So I'm going to undo that, and let's pump this up to like 1344. So you can see the Dynamesh has closed some of the open holes, which is nice. I just undid it. I'm going to do a little bit higher than that. So let's do 16. That's about 774,000, so that's kind of nice overall. But you can see it's made, where all these green splotches are is where it's closed the surface for me. There's still a few little holes here and there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with the inflate brush and do some touch-ups and smoothing as well. just as some of this nasty geometry. I'll do a little bit of inflation. And what I'm trying to do here is, let's take a look inside. So you can see that even though we Dynameshed, it's got a lot of the geometry in the inside here, some of this muscle stuff and everything, which is beautiful, but not necessarily stuff we need. This stuff is it's very cool though. So as I'm going through and cleaning up this version of the Dynamesh, what I'm doing is I'm trying to preserve the shape as much as possible, but I'm also want to close some of these holes and these gaps, these things right here. Because as I close off the surface, when you create a Dynamesh, it's basically creating a shell. And if you have little holes that poke on the inside and stuff, that can, the Dynamesh algorithm is going to look inside those holes and try and Dynamesh the stuff on the inside as well. So you end up with a lot of geometry that you don't necessarily need. So I'm going to delete this, right? This little thing right here, I don't really need that, so I'm going to just hide it. In this case, I'll do modified topology, delete hidden, and control drag and release to do another Dynamesh. And so I'm just kind of closing this up here in these spots that I know it's going to create kind of this geometry on the inside. And then, here's a good example. This little hole, right? You can see how it's gone on the inside, and we have this sort of muscle stuff that we don't necessarily want. So if I close this off and do another Dynamesh, it might not do it now, but you can see there's a separation there. There's no longer a connection. There's a connection somewhere else that I gotta get rid of, but that's kind of what I'm doing as I'm going through here, is closing off all those little parts that might be leading to a connection. And eventually, once I get them all done, you'll see that when I do a Dynamesh, we'll no longer have the stuff on the inside will just disappear once we get to that point where we've closed it off. And you'll see the point count will dramatically decrease as well because we don't have the geometry on the inside. But this kind of stuff takes a bit of practice, and that's why working with 3D print is useful, because you can't get away with anything with 3D print. You've really got to get rid of any of that weird geometry on the inside. So that's the other reason why I keep a copy of that subtool around, because I can always use, if in the process of doing this I start to distort my model too much, then I can always use that as a reference and go back and fix the things I need to. But some of these little caverns here, sometimes I'll use the inflate brush, and other times if it's a really big cavern or problem, I'll use an insert mesh and insert a sphere, like a lump of clay, to close it off. And the other thing I'll do is, after I've gotten through this process, which, believe it or not, it doesn't take too long. It looks like it's going to take forever, but it's not. You kind of learn where the problem areas are going to be and how to get rid of them. But after the next step after that is to separate into polygroups, and then do a Dynamesh, and that will separate each part into a different part. So we'll have to think when we get to that part about how to separate the knee area from the other parts. That can be a little tricky too. But like I said, this kind of understanding this technique is also useful in visual effects, not just in science, not doing visualization. I get scans all the time from a set, from a TV show or something like that, and sometimes the scans are just truly horrible. They're having to rebuild things. just cleaning this up, and then for this stuff down here, this extra hair, you do a little bit of inflate and then smooth and kind of rinse and repeat just to get rid of these little nubs. Just do a little bit more going down this hair. Whoops. Come on. Some hairs, especially with flies, some hairs are very important. The arrangement is how the species is often identified. There's a lot of species of flies out there. Well, there are a lot of species, a lot of insects out there. So, but then there's other hairs which are just like overall fuzz. So you have to learn which hairs are important and which hairs are, can be more randomized. Hidden. And just move that like that. As I'm doing this, I'm watching that point count go down every time I Zremesh, and I was down to 696. So what I'll do is right here is maybe inflate this stuff. Fuse it all together, and it's going to get all lumpy. So everything looks like a big lump. So here's a part right here. I'm going to close off just on the inside. I'll have to rebuild that later when I'm doing the knees. That's looking pretty good overall. Here's a good example of a problem area that's, take a look inside. You can see where these layers are kind of joining up with each other. So I'll inflate this, do a Zremesh, do a couple times until the holes disappear. See, still there. Let's see where let's save this guy. But you can see how it's becoming a bit more simplified. Let's go up here to this area. Just do a little bit of inflate and close off some of these areas. Here's an example. This little space right here, it's very cool, but it's going to cause some issues. So what I might do is stuff a sphere in here, kind of like I did before. I switch over to the move brush, because if you're going to 3D print this would come in and be a real problem. do a Dynamesh. So you just learn over time where to look to find those problem areas. It's basically any of these little corners. Switch over to inflate. Smooth that out. That looks pretty good. So you go down to 678 in terms of the point counts. We've lost a lot of points, which is good. That means we're headed in the right direction. Now what I'm going to do is go down here and smooth a lot of this stuff, and let's do a little bit more shaving on these hairs. Oops. Keyboard is kind of sticky, so sometimes when I hold the Alt key and let go, it doesn't always do it the way I want it to. There we go. There's a lot of scan data that you can find online, by the way. This one was given to me by someone who did the scan themselves. So it belongs to them, and it's very high quality compared to a lot of stuff I've been. But the technology for creating high quality scans is becoming more accessible. And then there's a lot of researchers that are posting just libraries of insect data online. So you can already find a whole lot at like Sketchfab if you look around. But let me see if I can find some URLs of some other places you can find scan data. I'll close this up a little bit because it's really good to practice and it's good for reference. And you can grab a lot of these things for free. Just build up a little library. So if you're a creature model and you want some inspiration, scan data sometimes just give you crazy amounts of inspiration that you can't just get from photographs. I lose my Dynamesh. Oops. Oh, let me go here. Modify topology. Delete hidden. There we go. Some straight points right there. Delete hidden. I'm going to inflate this just in case that's something important that I want to keep around. So right here we have a lot of little holes and crevices, so use the inflate brush to kind of squish those together. Hey Zed Skipper, how are you doing? Thank you for joining me today. It's evening where I am. We're going to separate these things into their own pieces after this phase is done. Here's a good spot for... Okay, so this has a big hole in it. That's a hole. So we're going to use insert mesh. And just stretch this to fill that hole. I'll have to go back to my reference later and see exactly what this part looks like. But I think it's just a hole in the scan, or maybe something I deleted by accident. But not a huge deal. Just a little bit of goo, a little plaster of Paris. Dynamesh it, smooth it, hole is gone. Sometimes you'll also take a clay brush and just some of those parts. Okay. So now we're going down to 482 points, which indicates to me that I probably got, yep, Now I've just got an empty shell, so we can see we're looking down into the tarsi. That's okay, but you can see I don't have all that muscle stuff on the inside anymore. It's just a thin surface. So by closing off all those holes, I've gotten rid of all that inside geometry which could cause problems later. See? It's just exactly what you'd expect. It's just a thin hole. So, okay, so you can see that on one side it's good and the other side is not. So we lost symmetry somehow. That's okay. So if we take a look, yeah, see how this has geometry on the inside but this doesn't? So what we need to do is we need to do a mirror and weld. But let's make sure we're doing the right side. So if we see this side has, I don't know how the symmetry got off, but it happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a draw right here. So just, oops, let's actually undo that. I'm going to turn off symmetry. Just make a little blob here in some inconspicuous part of the geometry. And then let's do mirror and weld. So we want, that's not the right side, so we're going to flip this over. So, because we want to mirror from the positive side over to the negative side. So this is the negative side, this is the positive side. This is the side we like, this is the side we don't like. So, what I could do is go down to deformation. This is a little bit irritating, I know, but I'll hit mirror. That'll flip it over. So now this is the side we like on the positive side. This is the side we don't like on the negative side. Now if we go in here and do mirror and weld, we get what we want. Point count is now down to 313,000. And you can see that's clean. I'm going to turn on symmetry here. Yeah, pretty much clean. So, let's save that. And the next step is to break this into polygroups. Let's turn off the floor. And do Control W just to do one group for the whole thing. And now I'm going to start looking where those divisions are. And this is why it's important to actually understand insect anatomy. I've done this enough times that I'm fairly confident that I'm going to do it right. So you can see we have that polygroup for the coxa and the trochanter. Another polygroup for the rest of the legs. So now I'm going to Control Shift click on that and see if I can, let's see. This one is a little bit tricky because you have this kinds of parts coming out and this right here. So rather than doing the select tool, I'm going to paint a mask. And so paint a mask. Do not have to necessarily be perfect because I'm going to be doing a lot of sculpting on top of this. So it's not something you need to get stressed out about because you know I'm going to be doing a lot of fixing later on. When we get into the sculpting phase, we'll just get as close as we can. And this part I'm a little bit unsure of right here, whether this is part of the trochanter or not. I'm going to say it's not. Let's do this. And then we'll take a look at our scan data here and see what that reveals. Okay, so it looks like this right here is part of the tree. It's like a, yeah, I can see right there. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to Shift S to drop this to the canvas and go back to my model and just take a look. Oh, it looks pretty good overall. I might clear this part of the mask off though. Okay. I'm going to go to masking and just hit boost mask just to make sure that anything that didn't get quite masked well enough is masked. And then I'll do Control W. Now you can see we have this polygroup, has some stray stuff right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do polygroup from right there. Just keep my polygroups as clean as possible. Okay. Control Shift click on this. Do this. Another trick I can do that. Something like that. And do Control Shift X to just grow the visible selection a little bit and hide this right here. The art of polygrouping. Oh, spiders are wonderful. I absolutely love spiders. My little girl loves spiders too. She always says, "Oh, cute," when she sees one. Like, that's how you raise your kids right. Appreciate spiders. There was a book I read when I was a kid, or my mom read to me, called "Be Nice to Spiders." It made a huge impression on me. It was a great little kids' books that taught kids how spiders are actually really beneficial 99% of the time. Let's create a polygroup for this guy. Of course, I'm a big fan of jumping spiders, so take a look if you haven't gotten into the world of jumping spiders. They're the most adorable things on the planet. Let me see if I can find a really good picture of a jumping spider for you. Not Lucas. They're real jumping spiders. These are my favorites. Is Phidippus Mystatius, and with a little smiley face. Look at this guy. But yeah, spiders are amazing. I'm sure I mentioned the book, The Biology of Spiders. That is a good one to check out if you want to learn really cool stuff about the actual biology of spiders. It's one of my favorites. Yeah, the jumping spiders are punk rockers, man. They have to dance. They have to dance. The males dance. And if they don't do the dance right when they're trying to woo the ladies will eat them. And literally the males have to hypnotize the female spiders so they don't get eaten. And you gotta wonder, it's like, the jumping spiders are very, very small. They have very, very small brains. So it's amazing that they're able to have such complex behaviors considering how teeny tiny their little brains are. Let's see. Usually it takes a few tries to figure out exactly how I want to do this. And like I said, if I don't get it right, it's not the end of the world. Stuff I'm going to fix anyways. But right now I just want to separate these guys into their own little pieces. Not necessarily subtools, but just pieces. So right here what I'll do is I'm going to Control Shift click on this. Create a new polygroup there, and then I'll Control Shift click on a point shared by these two polygroups right here. Control W, now that's its own polygroup, so that's a little bit better. And then this part should be a little bit easier. Let's get it to an angle. I see that. Okay, so now we have polygroups for the major parts of the leg. Let's see the sucker, and then we're going to save next. And then I'll go into geometry under Dynamesh, and I'm going to turn on groups and do another Dynamesh. And by turning on groups now, that's going to create a polygroup that's closed off. So it's going to close off all those open edges for each of these polygroups. So that's going to make life a lot easier. So we can go in here, Control Shift, click on this. Come on. Here we go. And just do a real quick clean up here of these parts. Like I said, I'm going to be doing some sculpting after I do a Zremesher here. That's a little nubby that I added. But I want to clean up these ragged edges here so that when it Zremeshes, it's a little bit easier. So I use the inflate tool, or inflate, and just go along these edges here and clean up the ragged holes and jagged stuff like this. Extra holes. I know tonight's, or this afternoon, or wherever you're at watching this particular live stream has been a lot more technical than the other ones, but this is kind of stuff that is a big part of working in ZBrush. The detailing part is always the fun. I always treat detailing as like the dessert. But right now I have to eat a lot of broccoli before I get to that point. That's the payoff. But the more time you spend prepping something and doing a good job, the easier your detailing will be. And if you're concerned about, like I am, getting things accurate, then you want to make sure that you spend a lot of time prepping before you get into detail. Because there's nothing worse than putting a lot of time and effort in detailing something and then just finding out that your anatomy is wrong. and you got to go back and redo it. So as opposed to when I'm just making stuff up and having fun, I spend a lot more time making sure that things are correct first. I still don't get the group option Dynameshing. Yeah, I mean, it splits all your polygroups into separate elements with super dirty edges. That is correct. Right now what I'm doing is I'm cleaning up those edges with the inflate tool. But that's kind of the point, because each of these parts of this is a different segment of the leg. So I want to have it as a separate mesh. Because then I'm going to Zremesh. I'm going to keep, for things like legs, like some parts of the insect I'm going to split into separate subtools, right? Like the head, and I'm going to separate from the mouth parts and so on. But the legs I'm going to keep as one subtool, because otherwise it just gets too many subtools to deal with if you have all the different parts of legs as individual subtools. So that's why I like to split these things into separate meshes. Then I'll do clean it up, do a Zremesh, but then keep it as one subtool. So I'm just cleaning up those ragged edges with the inflate brush. And then I'll do a Zremesh. Everything with Dynamesh is going to be messy. It's like, to me, I always think of Dynamesh as being like the sketching phase. This its own polygroup so I can get rid of it easily later. These are okay. And I'm keeping the foot as one mesh. I could split these into different parts. I might do that later on, but for right now I'm just going to keep it as one mesh that I can sculpt on. Okay, so now still got groups on. Let's do a Dynamesh and hope that it works. Sometimes you get nasty mangled geometry that you got to clean, but that's all right. Or sometimes it'll freak out and you'll get something that looks like just a billion little itty bitty pieces. And that happens sometimes. Lowering your Dynamesh resolution and trying again will fix it. Do an undo, lower the point count, re-Dynamesh, and that might fix it. And sometimes it could be a little bit. It's just when the algorithm gets confused, if there's like overlapping geometry at some point that it can't figure out, and you can get some really nasty results. So I'm just smoothing this stuff right here. There we go. And you can still see kind of the grid from the original sphere that I stuck in there. Okay. So now we have this. And there's that one teeny tiny. This one right here. I'm gonna delete that. Okay. So now that I have this, let's save it. And I'm going to do save next. I'm going to store this history point, press the control and click on that little marker right there. It's a really good question, Nick. Is there a way to keep Dynamesh from welding close elements like when you try model mouth cavity lips? Yeah, I think polygroups is a good way to do that. The other thing you can do is you can let me see this real quick. Let's do this. let's say, for the sake of argument, oops. This is not going to be the greatest head model in the world, but just a very simple human head. Let's do this. Let's minimize this for a second. Go to Dynamesh, and let's do. I'm not going to get fussy with this. It's not about making head geometry. But what I'm going to do is going to. I'm just going to show a couple techniques you can try when doing this kind of thing. Doing a mask here. It's a mask, okay? You know, if you're modeling this kind of thing, I'm doing this super fast, so don't laugh at my geometry or my human anatomy. All right, we're doing Dynamesh here. I mean, a couple things you could do is, this is a very low resolution, but you could paint a mask right here, right? Control W to make it its own polygroup, and then this is probably not going to work the way I want to, but we can give it a try. Dynamesh. Oops. There we go. Oops. Yeah, that's not going to work the way I wanted to. Another way to do it would be to, let's say you wanted to open up the mouth. You could use a primitive. This is like what we do before we really had Booleans. If you're in Dynamesh mode, you can use the insert mesh, hold the Alt key, and I'm drawing a sphere in here while holding the Alt key. You can't really see it because it's inside. I'm going to turn double-sided on. We can see that the rest of the model is masked. Well, you can always clean up those edges and then re-Dynamesh, right? I mean, you can use like the inflate brush to clean up those edges and then re-Dynamesh. That's what I was kind of doing with the leg, with the insect leg. But if I control drag and being a jerk. ZBrush, not you. I'm just cleaning up those ugly edges, and then I can bring this in. And then, yeah, I think there's always going to be some, if your issue is that there's going to be ugly edges with Dynamesh, then it's always going to be ugly seams that you're going to have to clean up. I don't know if there's a way around that strictly Dynamesh. I mean, what I'm going to do with the insect lag, of course, now is do a Zremesher, which will also help with that. But you notice I went through and each one of these and cleaned up the edges here with the inflate and smooth brush, and then re-Dynameshed. And now what I can do is I'm going to, like I said, store this history point right here, and then do a Zremesher. So I'll go in here under geometry, Zremesher, and then let's set this, turn on keep groups. Set the target, let's just set this to half. I'll leave adaptive on for the moment and do a Zremesher. So I'm getting an error. It says remeshing encountered, error, remeshing aborted. So just go down here to mesh integrity, fix mesh, try it again. This time it works. So there's my first Zremesher. Let's take a look at it. See if any of the thin spots like this. I might go in here and inflate this real quick before I do it again, just so it doesn't get too nasty towards the end there. Because when you're doing Zremesher, the thin spots are the parts that are going to give you the most problems, like down here. So I'm going to inflate it because I can always fix it later when I'm sculpting and make it thin and thin again. That's easy enough to do. So do that. Looks a little silly, but that's okay. These other thin spots, pointy spots. So let's do another Zremesher. Got another error encountered, no problem. We'll just fix the mesh with mesh integrity. Try again. Are you talking about just the display of the model when you're working with low active subdivides or having polygroups? At some points, the polygroups randomly get pixelated with ZBrush. Had a solution for it. If you're talking about that, just is it go away when you change the view of the model, or is it something that persists? Because it is sort of part of the ZBrush technology. That's been a problem for a while, ever since day one. But it's usually just a display problem that goes away just when you change the view. I barely even notice it. Or is it something that stays when you do it? Let's see. That looked pretty good. So now we're down to about 56,000 points. So this is going to do the Zremesher limbo and see how low we can go. Do another Zremesher. That's pretty good. Now, if I was going to get really persnickety about the topology, I do a hand read topology, either using ZModeler, or what I used to do in the old days is I'd export this into Maya and use quad draw, which sometimes I still do. But for insect parts like this one, I think it'll probably be okay. You can always check and see if I have spirals here. That looks pretty good. I'm just shift clicking on an edge here while I have lasso select mode that hides a poly loop. And it's a good way to see if you have like spirals. And this one, it's not too bad. I expect there to be some. This has geometry on the inside of it though. That's not great. But this is pretty good. Oh, thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. Okay, so there's a good example of some spirals. Not ideal. Especially when we do unwrap for UVs later. Most of the other ones are pretty good. So what I'll do, this is all good. Oops. For the most part. So this one, Spiral City. So one thing I can do is I'm going to Control Shift click on this to hide everything else. And I'm just going to make a polygroup here at the end. I'm going to paint a mask and Control Shift click for a polygroup, and I'm going to make another polygroup right here, just treating this as this is a big cylinder. By creating sort of caps using polygroups. And then what I might do is I'm going to Control Shift click on this. Oops. And I'm just going to use polygroups as a way to guide the Zremesh, because I don't really like using the curves option. I like polygroups. For me is just a bit easier, so I'll create a polygroup there. So you can see this particular part of the model now has 4 polygroups. The rest of them I'm leaving alone. So I'm going to set this to same rather than half. I could turn off adaptive, and I'll turn on keep groups. And let's see, if I do Zremesh, you can see how now this has a line that's kind of neat. This has a line that's kind of neat. And so now I don't have those spirals for the most part. And what I'll do is I'll hide this guy. And I'll do Control W. Now I have a polygon for each one. And you know, it's quick and dirty topology fix. Nothing beats hand retopology, but hand retopology is very time consuming. And a lot of times you find out that your solution is not that much better than if you just done Zremesh. But you have a very simplistic kind of shape now. Let's go down here. Having an issue where I have interior geometry. So let's see how we can fix that. The problem is that I have this going on the inside. So what we'll do is this. I'm going to Control Shift click on this and do a split hidden. So now I have, here are my legs without the feet. Here are my feet without the legs. And I'm just going to go and subdivide this a few times. Do a quick Dynamesh, just as a method of closing this off. Okay, subdivision levels, we'll go in here and inflate. Let's inflate this, inflate this. Got our 2 feet. Now I don't have any geometry on the inside, so I'm going to do a Zremesh. I don't care about groups. You mean polypaint for when you're doing Zremesh as opposed to polygroup? Yeah, I still kind of like the polygroups because they're very simple to use. But polypaint works. What I do sometimes where I have to paint a really complex mask, what I'll do is I'll use polypaint and paint black on white and then convert that into a mask and then use that for my polygroup. That works pretty well too. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'm going to take my legs and here's my legs, here's my feet, and I'll just do subtool, my brain stopped, merge, there we go. Let's save this real quick. I always save before you merge subtools. And I'll do a merge down. There we go. So now we fix that issue with the geometry. So now we have this, which is a very simplified version of our legs. We lost a lot of the detail, but we can get that back. I'm going to subdivide this a couple times. And we have this right here, our stored history point. So let's see what happens when we just do a project. So I'm going to do project history. It's okay, but we get some nastiness here and there. But it brings back some of our forms, so that we don't have too much of a drift away from the original anatomy. And of course we still have the actual original anatomy right here. Is that? No, that's rear leg, sorry. We have the original scan data still. Let's bring this down here. So that's our original mid-leg scan data, so we can always use that as a reference as well. But let's go in here and you can see how far we've drifted a little bit, because I think the original scan was not perfectly symmetrical. This is pretty much on, but you can see this is kind of drifted away. That's okay. Turn on solo, and now we can go in here, just clean some stuff up. Projection errors go, this is not too bad. I'm just hitting it with a smooth brush. I'm going to go through and sculpt on each one of these parts, but right now I just want to do a quick cleanup from the project history. That's something I'll probably get rid of, but that's okay. That's not too bad. add some projection nastiness. It looks like some stray points here. Let's go into we can do right here. Some stray polygons here. And so what I can do is, I've hidden everything else, but I'm going to polygroups and do auto groups. And it'll create a polygroup for each of these little strays. And now what I'm going to do is, whoops, Control Shift click on. Actually, let's do this. Control Shift click on it once. That's good there. Okay. So hidden those little strays. I'm going to do split hidden as opposed to delete, just to make sure I didn't hide anything I didn't mean to. So yeah, that's the whole thing. So I could just delete this. And that gets rid of those strays. Okay, so now I've done all that, I think I can start focusing on sculpting these things into something that looks better. So I've got my basic geometry now sorted out, and on the polygroups and all that kind of good stuff. So, let's save this. Oh yeah, Sculptris Pro is a good way to clean up the Dynamesh as well. That's really a matter of choice. I think Sculptris is really good when you have some serious nastiness, but I use the old school inflate things. It's fast and easy. Doesn't create any extra geometry, but Sculptris works really well too. What I like about the Sculptris, and use a smooth brush, is it can also act like an eraser to just basically erases nastiness that you don't want. But I think they work both as well. The one reason I like cleaning it, if you're doing something for 3D print and you're cleaning up Dynamesh with Sculptris, that can add some geometry errors that you're gonna have to go back and fix again. It's true you could say that about Inflate as well, but not quite as much. I think that's kind of a personal preference, but depending on the model, sometimes I'll use Sculptris as a way to clean up Dynamesh. I like using Dynamesh and Sculptris together at the same time, because you can just Sculptris away for a while, then Control Drag and re-Dynamesh, and that works pretty well. So I'd say, yeah, they both work fine. Okay, so we got our mid legs here. Let's take a look at some reference. And of course, the problem is I can't remember which one's the mid legs. The front. This could be the mid legs. I think that's the front legs right there. That could be the rear legs. This is not a honeybee. Honeybees have really obvious big pollen baskets on their rear legs, so it's pretty obvious which one's the rear legs. But what I'll do is I'm going to open up the original paper just so I know what I'm looking at is right. So I'm going to find it on my hard drive. Okay, so this is the pollen basket, so that's the rear legs. So that means that this right here, this would be much bigger in a honeybee. So that's the hind leg. Hind leg. Hind leg. Front leg. Front leg. Middle leg. Inner face. Middle leg. Outer face. Okay. Sorry, I hope severed legs doesn't gross anybody out. Here's what I'll do. Right middle leg. That's what I should be looking for. These scientists are so clever. Okay. Now I got some reference. Yeah, well, you know what? That's one of the reasons why I don't do as much character modeling. Especially, I saw a great talk in the Paris IMAG conference by the guy who works on Shogun, the series, and it's a pretty gory series. A lot of people being hacked to bits and blown to bits and all that kind of stuff. And this guy's actually an expert. He's become an expert at animating or doing dynamics for bodies, human bodies being blown up. So he gets a lot of work that way, and basically involves him looking at reference of dead bodies all day long. I don't have the stomach for that. Insects is no problem, but dead bodies, yuck. Not a fan. That's pretty gross right there. And that's gross enough for me. Let's take a look here. It's hard to, this part right here, you can see this right here is our trochanter, and that's where it joins with the coxa right there. So let's see if we can get a similar view. It's not easy to get exactly the same view, but we just start with what we know. Yeah, something like that. And just start shaping it right there. So start with the parts that are more obvious. Oh, I could see that right there. You can see where my all the Dynameshing and remeshing and stuff has gotten away from the original a little bit. But I also know I had a friend of mine who's a really great artist. He did a lot of, when I say really great, I mean unbelievably great. And he worked on a lot of Magic the Gathering stuff and all that kind of stuff, but he's really amazing figure artist, human figure. And he had a girlfriend who worked in a morgue, and he used to spend nights in the morgue just drawing dead people from the actual thing all night long. And I was just like, I don't think I can do that, guys. That's just too gross. Do scans usually come in segmented pieces, or is it one giant mesh? Usually one giant mesh. Sometimes you get segmented, but usually it's one thing. That's what I've been spending the whole session doing, is just chopping it up to segments I can work with. Where did I find the reference? Well, you can't find this particular reference because I'm doing this for Stephen Buckman, who's a scientist who contacted me to do this particular bug. So he's provided me with the scan data and he's provided me with the images. So for this particular one, you're going to be out of luck. But for scan data in general, there's lots of places. You can always start with Sketchfab. Let's see if we can find a good website for you. Okay, here's a good one. Biocommunications.org, Insects 360. They're putting together an entire library of scans, insect scans, and so these are going to be like a big blob. They look really good because they have texture models, and they are really high quality scans. Give it a second here to load. Hopefully it will load. Let's see if we can get one to load here. It's slow. Try this one. After it loads, it has a 3D model you can turn around. But I believe you should be able to download this. If not, you can probably contact them. Let's take a look at their 3D scans page. This is why I would say it's good to get to know scientists. Okay, continue reading. They have downloads. Download. Here would end. Share this page. There we go. You can see there's a 3D model. I think for these guys, you might actually have to contact them in order to download the actual scan model. But the guy did tell me he was going to share these models online. There are other databases that have models that you can find. But I'd say first place I would look would be like Sketchfab. There's a lot of crappy insect models on there by people who are just doing crappy like monsters for games or whatever. But if you look through insect scans, you'll find that there are laboratories that are sharing scans online. I'm surprised, where is the link for download this thing? I think you'd have to contact them to download. Well, okay, that one sucks, but I mean, it doesn't suck. It's a great website. I'm sorry. What happens if you do insect scans? That's an insect scanner. Here we go. Free 3D. Okay, most of these are terrible, but you can find a few okay ones. That's a good Sketchfab. So this is like, it's nice because it has a texture, and the textures are nice, but if you look at it without the texture, it's going to be probably, yeah, that's what it's going to look like. So this is a great one to download if it's free or cheap and practice on. And then you can find some reference on online and start to really dial in the details. You can get a lot of detail ideas from the actual color though as well. But these are good ones to practice on or just to have as reference. So Sketchfab is a good place to start. In terms of imagery, a lot of times you got to hunt around online, and that's the real challenge. That's why I ended up taking up photography and ended up going to places like Africa to take pictures of spiders and bugs because I wanted to get my own reference library. You can also order dead specimens online. I do this all the time. Excuse me. Get yourself a nice microscope, look at it under a microscope, stereoscopic if you can afford it. And then take your own pictures and reference imagery. Yeah, you can't find cute anime girls as easily. If you wanted to, Black Widow model is, there's going to be a lot of Black Widow models available online, but that's not a reason not to do it because yours might be the one that somebody's looking for. But what I would do, here's what I would do is look for a model of a spider that somebody's selling online and hopefully not too expensive, buy it and then see how it looks when you get it. What textures does it come with and how do they format it? Is the rig any good? Is it actually usable? And use that, look at the ratings. If something is really highly rated, it's worth investing the money in buying that model and then seeing how because when you're selling models online, whether it's Fab or Sketchfab or TurboSquid or whatever, they have certain standards for how they want the model packaged, right? And also the screenshots that you show, the wireframe, the rig, textures, etc. So you'll have more success if you look at a successful model and use that as your basis. But I would say, if you want to just sell your Black Widow model for 250,000 points or polygons, that's fine as long as you say this is a high-res model. If you wanted people to be able to use it immediately in an animation, then you might want to consider creating a low poly version of it that's rigged. Excuse me. And if you're going to rig it, is it going to be rigged for use in Maya or Unreal or something like that? Or Blender, each one of those things, or are you going to sell as an FBX or USD or multiple formats? So, just making a model and selling it online actually takes a fair amount of work to do, but it's a worthwhile process to go through it because once you go through it a few times, then you can start making more models. I made some mushroom models way back when and sold it a little bit on Unreal. It's something I've been meaning to get back into because I have a huge library of insects and spiders that I'd like to actually sell online. I just haven't had the time because of work and other things to actually go and do it the way that at the level that I'd like to do. So, but that's basically my approach, is to look at what actually works for other people and then use that as a guide, imitate it, If you spend, $50, $60 on somebody else's model, but it's packaged really well, then you can use that as your basis. But if you just want to throw the model online as is, you can do that as well. It just depends on your goals. If this is something you really want to make a lot of money off of, then it's going to take a while. It's just like setting up any other kind of store or digital store. And then, of course, you've also got to market this stuff so that people know that it exists, which is something I'm generally terrible at, but hopefully getting better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a clay tubes brush. Blah. The low is the intensity. I'm going to subdivide this guy again. And also let's do mask by polygroups. And I'm just going to start shaping this one piece at a time before I add the details. I think you're going to get more sales if you make models that are usable in multiple formats. So I would do like an FBX that could be used in Maya and Blender and that kind of stuff. So, you know, when I work with motion graphics companies like Filmograph, they do a lot of title work. And I do a lot of title work with them as well. And usually when they're first starting a job, let's say it's like when we did Wednesday opening titles, or they did a lot of John Wick titles, you know, they're going to start with the pitch to the client, to the director and the company. And that pitch is usually going to be in the form of what they call mood boards, which is kind of like a very stylized storyboard. It's more about the look than and a bit about the story, but it's not the same as a storyboard for an actual movie production, right? But they generally do this with a lot of Photoshop, and then they'll get models from like TurboSquid, or, you know, to start with. And once they get approved on the pitch, they can get models from the actual production. There's a lot of times it's scan data that I have to clean up, or sometimes it's just a few images that I have to model based on. Or sometimes they'll go to TurboSquid if it's like something really generic, you know, like maybe it's like just a generic samurai sword or something like that, maybe not something specific to the movie. Then they'll get that from TurboSquid, and I'll have to go through and clean it up or use that as a starting point. Or sometimes it's just good enough as it is. But you know, they have very specific needs, and so they'll look at a lot of models first. A good example is we did the titles for the HBO Dune Prophecy series, and there was a bowl in that sequence that they used. It's a pretty cool sequence. And they ended up getting, you know, nice high quality model off of TurboSquid for that, which is a bummer because I really wanted to model that bowl, but whatever. You know, it all comes down to how much time and budget they have for doing these things. So if you're going to sell models online, you know, even though there might be a bunch of Black Widow models already, not necessarily the Black Widow model that everybody needs. Maybe yours has something that people, that an effects company might actually need, the way it's rigged or the way it's modeled or something like that, or the accuracy. So that's why it's a good idea, if it's something you're interested in doing, to give it a try. This looks kind of crappy. This is an example where I'm fighting the topology. The Zremesher is great and it got me something quick, but I'm fighting the geometry here and trying to get a nice clean, getting this lip here. So what to do about that? Well, here's what we can do. So this is why I like split hidden, because if you have subdivisions on a model already, you can do split hidden, so hidden the rest of the model, and it'll keep the subdivision levels, which is kind of nice. So here's this part of the model without it. Here's the model, part of the model that I want to do a quick retopology on because this geometry is driving me nuts. So what I do is polygroup there. Let's do this. Let's go into geometry. I'm going to delete lower level of subdivision. Keep groups. Doesn't seem like it kept groups. Yeah, keep groups. Interesting. Oh, I know what happened. A lot of symmetry on that. Okay. So we'll just do this. There we go. Haven't really done much work on this yet, so I don't mind deleting higher levels of subdivision. And then I'll go down here. Take Control W, and then just merge this down. There we go. And now hopefully this will be a bit easier to sculpt. I'm kind of just going to start shaping this with the clay tubes brush with the low Z intensity. Let's make sure I still have symmetry on. And kind of using this clay tubes brush, kind of like sandpaper, just to kind of start shaping this, keeping it look somewhat organic, but then working with some of those parts. Because there are planes on here, even though it's kind of very soft and there's a smooth transition, it still has a shape that can be defined with planes, just like a human face. So I'm looking for those parts in the reflected surface, the specular highlights, to give me a clue. And of course, we also have the scan data as well that we can use. I'm just starting to shape this and then kind of looking at how the forms work out. I've got this right here, I think, is an issue that I have to solve. Let's turn off the scan data for a second. Because this looks like it's going to be more of a, it's going to not be as pointy. So I'm going to do Shift D to go down a couple subdivision levels and start to make that look a little bit rounder. And then in this part we have sort of a, it's like a V right here, from what I can tell. A lot of this part is the stuff that I filled in with a sphere, so I can't go by the shape of this. It's not as accurate. And unfortunately it's missing from the scan data. It's just a big hole right there. So I'm going to have to kind of use the old photographic reference here to shape this. Is it going to be 100% accurate? I don't know. It's also going to be part of the model that is really hidden. This is buried like in the body of the thorax, so it's not going to be visible in the final animation. I still want it to be accurate though, because I like accuracy. That's the reason I do this. But I also have to make a decision sooner or later how this is going to work in order for it to actually get done. So I'm going with this for now, and I might have to go back and fix it later. Maybe I'll find another image that will reveal something I didn't see before. Or sometimes when you're working on another leg, like the mid legs, the hind legs, this part, the coxa here, might have more intact on some of the other legs, and then I can glean some idea of what these shapes are supposed to be from that. So I'm going to go kind of fast and loose for now, with the assumption that later on I'll get more data. But this part is fairly clear right here, this right here. That I can sculpt with a bit more confidence. And it's usually easier, I find, when you get to this phase, it's easier to work with Zremesh geometry that has a nice topology, because then I can move up and down at subdivision level, as opposed to Dynamesh, which can get a little bit hairy. Okay, so let's take a look at where we're at. I'm going to wrap this up for today and continue with this next week. Or I might go back to the katydid, or I might do a little bit of both. Maybe I'll do like an hour on the katydid next week and an hour on this, so it's not all too much of the same thing. There is several versions of ZBrush. You can get ZBrush Core Mini, which is free, which is a very basic version of ZBrush with limited tools, but it gives you a sense of how it works. Then there's a ZBrush Core, which is a very inexpensive version of ZBrush. It's like a ZBrush Lite. It has many of the same tools, but not the extended tools. And then, of course, there's also the full version of ZBrush, which is you can get on a subscription basis. So if you don't use it all the time, you can turn it on and off on a month, depending on how often you use it. But I would say check the Maxon website. I can't remember if there's a trial version. There might be a trial version. Let's see. Yes, there is a trial version of Maxon ZBrush. So go to, oh, look at the jumping spiders. Da 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 da. Maxon ZBrush. That's a year, and then you do have a free trial, which is worth getting. So I say check out the free trial and see all the cool stuff you can do with it. Look at these guys, man, they're crazy. Look at that snake, it's nuts. Look at that snake guy. And this dude, he's got armor. Now look at that shiny thing. And this guy, the snake is going crazy. Yeah, so check out the free trial of ZBrush. And I'll see you guys next week, same time. Thank you very much for joining me. Thanks for all your great questions.